Welcome all to the Faculty of Arts here at KU Leuven. Welcome to the students, welcome to my colleagues. I see many of them, many of people of the European Commission that we are happy to host here. People from Europa Nostra, from the European Heritage Hub, and you see that quite a few organizations felt supportive of our program today with speaker Justin O'Connor on his quite popular book, an impactful book. We will hear about that a lot today. As you see, we have a quite filled program where we have first a lecture and then a debate on some of the key themes, followed by a reception, which is also a networking event. And so also students and colleagues involved in Una Europa, I should mention, you know, KU Leuven is a member of this European University network. I now first pass the floor to Alejandro Rodriguez, who will shortly tell us about EACEA and how culture is important for the Commission and what their ideas on that are. So I give you the floor.
Hello. Yes, so first I would like to thank you very much, the University of Leuven, for giving us the opportunity to be here, as well as together with my colleague from the European Commission, and give a few words on this. So my name is Alejandro Ramilo. I work at the European Education and Culture Executive Agency, which is one of the an institution that was created by the European Commission to run, in a way, the Creative Europe program, and in this case, the pilot and preparatory actions in the field of culture, of which the European Heritage Hub, which is the context in which we're here today. So the thing is that why the European Union, worries about culture and works on culture, and I can say that in this case, we have gone a very long way. So the first time that culture makes it into the European Union field of action was in 1993 with the Treaty of Maastricht. This is when the article on cultural cooperation, which is the cornerstone of whatever we have to do or we can do on culture, was inscribed into the treaties. So culture remains a strong competence in the hands of the European Union member states, but the European Union since 1993 was able to work in this particular field. So from that point of view, we have moved from a number of catered programs that were financed in the 90s to a fully fledged cultural program for 14 years from 2000 to 2014. So this new cultural program, which actually increased heavily in budget compared to the previous ones, include all of the cultural and creative sectors with the exception of the audiovisual sector. Since 2014, we have again 14 years until the end of the current multi-annual financial framework with Creative Europe. So Creative Europe takes everything that was done previously, but then adding on top the audiovisual sector. So it's the single program today in which the European Union is exclusively investing on culture. And it's about theater, it's about architecture, it's about cultural heritage, it's about cinema, it's about video games, and many more things. The budget of these programs have steadily increased. And why is that? Because everything that you do, from the academia to practitioners to organizations, networks, and so on, has been very powerful for us. Because not only you delivered on, let's say, positive value or cultural values per se, which are really very important for us, but also you have an impact on the wider policies of the European Union. So cultural heritage, to name just an example, has been a very important asset when it comes to international cooperation. It has been a very important asset in order to promote cohesion. It's a very important aspect when it comes to the values that cultural heritage embodies. And it's the same with everything that goes around culture. So now, I think that this conversation is more important than ever because in 2025, the European Commission will produce, I mean, let's hope for the end of the year, a cultural compass. This cultural compass is going to renew everything that was done by the European Commission for the last 25 years. The first agenda, which is the political document laying down what the European Union intends to do on culture, was adopted in the 9th of May of 2007. It was revised in 2018, and here we are in 2025. This is, so a public consultation was actually open in order to receive let's say, the contribution from stakeholders, citizens, and so on. The second package is the budget. This year, in July, the Commission will also publish a first proposal on the next multi-annual financial framework, which is the EU budget for 7 years in principle. And then, indeed, it will be quite interesting to see, for all of us, the financial means that will accompany this compass, and the structure of it, and so on and so forth. Again, there is a public consultation on this for the stakeholders to contribute. So I think that this conversation is really very important today. I think it actually enables us to a little bit step out of our normal mindset, or everything that we think we know about the reality of the cultural and creative sector, and think a little bit on a wider perspective. And from that point of view, I would like to congratulate you for the very insightful work that has triggered a lot of reflection and debates already in the Brussels bubble when it comes to the European Union and our cultural and creative policies. And I'm pretty much looking forward for the results of this, not only the lecture, but also the panel that will follow. Thank you very much.
So thank you. I will now give the floor to my colleague Koen van Balen, who will introduce shortly also the speaker.
Okay, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce Justin O'Connor, Professor Justin O'Connor, and I will be also moderating the debate and the discussion that we will have after that. I just would like to recall that in a learning environment, it's important to have dialogues, and so very much we will like also you to react, to have questions after this talk. And similarly, when we will have the debate, it will not be a debate between two people, but it will be debate also together with you, and we will see in which direction it will flow. So, for those who don't know, of course, we saw the cover of this one, but I was also surprised in a certain way to find the book in Dutch, Reset. And the version of the book.
An early version.
An early version of the book. Yeah, so maybe you explain it, but I thought it was interesting to see that in our language area, if I can say so, with the Netherlands, and because I think it was published in the Netherlands, we would find many of the ideas which in a certain sense are coming back in this book that you will be presenting. But okay, let's talk about you. So you are a professor of cultural economy at Adelaide University, a visiting professor at Jiatong University in Shanghai, and so you will be presenting a lecture on the role of art and culture in contemporary society, and I think, as it has been said, quite timely in the discussions nowadays, reclaiming them for the common good. And you will discuss them from your recent work, including culture is not an industry, reclaiming art and culture, as you can see here, as the common good, focusing on the impact of creative industries and the need for a shift in how culture is understood and valued. So you have been working in the field of cultural policy and theory since 1990. You combined this research practice with dedication to support governments and jurisdictions globally to address complex policy equations. With this work on Reset, which is this one, here, that's why I bought the book, and this new book, Culture is Not an Industry, you seek to move culture policy away from the creative economy towards a full restatement of culture as a public good and its centrality to any civilized, just society. So from 2012 to 2018, you were a professor of communication and cultural economics at Monash University in Melbourne. And you were also part of UNESCO's expert facility in support of the 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Cultural Diversity. Before that, you helped set up Manchester's Creative Industry Development Services and advise the cities in Europe, Russia, Korea, and China. And you're also the author of a number of other publications, which like Red Creative, Culture and Modernity in China, with Xing Gu, if I explain this properly, and the working paper Reset, we are just referring to art, culture, and the foundational economy. So the foundational economy definitely will be something very present. And during our talks that we had the recent days, we figured out that you and some of others who were also together in this famous meeting that defined culture as the fourth pillar of sustainable development, and that has also led to some other reflections, I guess. But now we will be keen to listen to your talk, and I think maybe just you will have some additional technical requirements to share with us.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, I can use this. I'll stand here. I'll use that one. That's okay.
Let me see if this is working.
I can. No.
That's also.
So switch off the microphone, you will use that microphone.
Yeah, I'll use this one.
Yeah, okay. We'll put it. Yeah, that works. Okay, so.
Right, thank you. Can you hear me with this microphone? Yes, good. Yeah, it's great to be here. I've never been to Leuven before, quite an amazing place. So some of it yesterday, so yeah, incredible. So it's great to be in this 17th century building here. In this, I like it actually. Yes, and it makes a change. I came from Venice, and the ceiling there was a Tiepolo ceiling. And I was like, it was very off-putting to speak with all these gods and goddesses flying around. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this book, and I'll try and I call the lecture 1 year on because it came out 1 year ago, and but also well, we'll get to it. I had another title for it, which I'll tell you about a bit later, and I'll try and reconstruct what I was thinking when I was writing it in a way. So I'm going to talk a bit about the creative industries, but I don't want to get too involved in them. So I'm going to be quite superficial. I'll just go through a few criticisms of them because otherwise it'll take me days. So, you know, the creative industries, as we all know, began with this document. And I say to many students, I teach students and they all write essays and they all start off with this quote. And I say, it was just an invented word. It has no other status than a guy in the Department of Culture, Media and Sport thinking, how do we make culture sound more sexy for the ministers of the finance minister? And I know who he is. He told me, John Newbegin, the head of Chris Smith, the minister's policy office. And so they came up with this definition, creative industries, yeah. And then they sent it out to a consultancy that nobody had ever heard of. At the time, I was in that kind of world a bit. I was academic, but nobody had ever... And they came up with this definition, which was nothing to do with the idea of cultural industries that we've been dealing with in the 90s. So I always tell people, this actually doesn't mean anything, and yet every consultancy report you ever read always quotes this. So, just to say, launched this 25-year history of economy and culture win-win, and this, a million reports on the economic effects of culture in all sorts of different ways, which I don't need to tell you about too much. And, problems with it, again, I'm just going to go over this, massively inflated figures. Of course, this all goes back to this list, and you look at number 12 at the bottom, second from bottom, software and computer services, always, the O'Connor rule, it's always 46% of whatever figure you read about CCI is software. So you can just cut it in half, really. Anyway, so really inflated figures. Most of the growth, I won't bother showing you this, but it's the same all over the world. Most of the growth is in advertising and marketing, graphic design, architectural services, which can mean almost anything, industrial design. So the actual culture employment, in using the Eurostat's definition of it, culture employment is very slow growth, usually slower than the rest of the economy, and it's around 3% of the workforce, which is fine, but that's what it is. It's not these 7, 8, 9% things. We also see a decline in older cultural industries, especially those to do with mass reproduction, really big drops in employment, especially actually for non-creative people, and they're not being replaced. And more generally, creative industries, which were sold at the end of the 90s as the replacement industries for deindustrializing Western economies, they are not replacement industries, and that's quite clear by now. Okay, other problems, it's incoherent. And I always say this, if you go to a wine industry conference or a car industry or a whatever, these industry conferences, there'll be lots of debates, but they won't spend 3 days saying, what do we mean by the wine industry? What do we mean by dairy products? Whereas if you go to a creative industry, that's all they talk about, endlessly. So nobody knows what it means. And in fact, I say in the book, it's a second order reality. It's one of those things that only appears when consultants and statisticians get their hands on it. And that's why they're the ones who make all the money in this sector, because they're the ones who can say, look, here are the figures. Whereas people on the ground, and actually what I've found, as we all know, that kind of massive explosion of economic analysis, which is really statistical advocacy, we have a declining knowledge about how the actual sector works. So I like research about how audiovisual sector is going or what's happening to the music industry. That's very different from this kind of creative industry stuff, which actually is not analytical at all. It's just aggregative. More fundamentally, the idea of creative industry, CCI, whatever, has eviscerated the cultural sector's sense of its own purpose and social worth. And it's we all know this, it's for the last 20, 30 years, it's been concerned to chase the external impacts. First it was the employment, but now it's all other things, anything that people think is a growth sector. Oh, well, we do that, culture does that. So, now at the moment it's well-being and health and well-being and whatever, perhaps security as well sometimes. And it's also clear then now the deep links with neoliberalism, which I'll talk about later. And it's not so much this idea of reduction of culture to its economic value. That, of course, is part of it. But it's also, I think, more damaging is this systemic reduction of the social and collective value of culture. And now, this is a whole other lecture, but cultural economics, basically, its very first premise says we can say nothing about the intrinsic value of art or culture, and therefore our concern is other forms of value. All cultural economics starts with that step, and actually, what it from the very beginning, it devalues that collective dimension of culture. And what we get is basically, a culture is an aggregation of individual preferences. So, did it bring culture to the policy table? That was the big thing, wasn't it? We're marginal, but we need to get up there with economic development. Well, no. I don't need to prove that. It's a marginal ministry and things. It's been cut out of the United Nations repeatedly. I'll say something a bit more about that later. It's been ever more instrumentalized, as I was saying, now it's well-being or competitiveness. And of course, declining levels of finance. Everywhere it's being cut. So if you sell your soul, at least you want a bit of, money for it, but in fact the opposite's happened in culture. And finally on this one, creativity marginalizes art and culture. We use the word creative as if it means culture, kind of, but it doesn't. And, these are two definitions from Nesta, which are very influential. And actually, they give the game away. Creativity is the application of creative talent to commercial ends. And a creative occupation, and this is repeatedly used, a role within the creative process that brings cognitive skills to bear about differentiation to yield either novel or significantly enhanced products whose final form is not fully specified in advance. That's the complete reduction of what we understand as cultural creativity, artistic creativity, to a moment in the creative value chain, if you like. So really, I think it's really problematic. Did it bring with it, did it float all boats? We all know it's a very unequal sector, winner takes all, and more so now. It's very much skewed towards the metropolis, away from the provinces and the rural. And of course, it's massively skewed towards the global north. We see it with the creative city, and again, this is almost banal, gentrification, the promise that, Richard Florida, etc., that creativity was going to renew cities in different ways. It's led actually to gentrification, the exclusion of the creative class in many places. We've got this consumption drives out production. They're not thriving. Many cities are not thriving centres of production, but actually places of consumption. And the beneficiaries have been real estate, finance, retail, and hospitality. Getting paid for what you love was another thing that was sold as it. Long hours, free labour, self-exploitation, low pay, low benefits, precarity, the always-on self-branding nature of creative entrepreneurs, and increasingly reduced autonomy at work. There used to be, the definition of a creative work, high levels of autonomy at work. That's becoming less so, and even less so with AI. So, trying to pull that together, this is a quote from Richard Florida. If workers control the means of production today, that's because it is inside their heads. They are the means of production. Now, this was completely wrong. Very few times you can say that in social science. This was completely wrong. They did not own the means of production. They had lots of tools, but they did not own it. The people who did own it are the ones who, of course, made the money out of it. And you probably can't see this, but actually existing cultural industries, in reality, not in the heads of a consultant, they actually are in a really different space than what's usually presented. This is one book that really goes into it. But, massive concentration, monopolies, really shift of profits away from labour to capital. I mean, not alone in that. So there's really big problems in the actual existing cultural industries. They are run by, I did this just a few days ago. So it's, this is the top 10 markets, companies by market capitalisation, and six of them deal in some way with the production and distribution of culture. These are the biggest corporations on the planet, and they're the ones that are bringing in the profits, not the creative class or whatever. And I'll come back to that. So, okay, where was I coming from all this? So, culture is an industry, obviously. What I've just said is 6 of the biggest corporations on the planet are somehow related to culture. It provides jobs. It's, there's contracts, loans, it's commercial, there's big commercial players, new technologies, etc. Of course it's an industry. And I say that because people, in the last year have come up to me and said, well, what do you mean culture's not an industry? Of course it's an industry. And what I'm saying is, yes, there are industries in culture, but culture itself is not an industry. But for a long time, I thought, actually, and me and many, the good faith of many people in the cultural sector was that, actually, culture could be seen as a kind of an industry or an economic sector, and it was a way of reimagining the economy. And this is, if you like, the utopian moment of cultural industries. Because, after the old smokestack corporate industries, we've got a new kind of economy. And the new kind of economy is, high levels of skills in education, networks, trust, communication intensive, strong role for small and medium-sized enterprises, low barriers to entry, beneficial externalities. All these claims, I've made them, and many other people made them. the idea is that somehow cultural economies are better economies. And I think that what's quite clear now is they're not. They've become the opposite. It's about exploitation of precarious labour. It's about monopolies and concentration. It's about data extraction for private profits, high levels of geographical concentration, globally unequal. 95% of the trade in global cultural services is global north, 95%. Narrow focus on high consumption groups. You know, if you're poor and you do certain things, you're not, you know, we're not interested really. Narrow policy focus on high growth, high value companies. So that kind of quite failed. But I think even the attempt to see it as a benign economy, I began to think, and certainly over the last few years, that, you know, we should see culture, return to culture as public policy, not as public policy for an industry, but to think about what do we want from culture. A limit of cultural economy thinking, no matter how benign a cultural economy is. How do we re-embed the economy within its social thing? That wasn't just me, that's a general shift. How do we reassert culture within public policy? And creative industries prevents us from thinking this clearly, because only economic performativity is allowed. And I can expand on that later if you like. So the key, you know, in what way can culture be seen as a public good rather than as a private consumption item? That's a key question. It's not the only question, but it's a key question because it shifts the paradigm, if you can begin to answer that. Now, a lot of my writing, I mean, the Reset book that Kern held up, I wrote it during a lockdown, like, you know, along with my sourdough and other things. But, you know, the pandemics, you know, things have to change. Things can't go back to the way they were. Do you remember that? You know, thank you to all the essential workers. Are cultural workers essential workers? Those kind of things. Big debates. And of course, that it brought a lot of things together for me and for many other people. One of the key things was this is Martin Wolf from the Financial Times. Neoliberalism is dead. That it's gone too far. This is, if you know Martin Wolf, it was quite amazing when this book came out in the last year, actually. You know, that it's, you know, the massive inequalities that laissez-faire capitalism has leashed on us. He calls it laissez-faire capitalism. You know, he talks only autocracy, plutocracy, or some combination of the two is likely to thrive in an economy that generates such insecurity and a polity that shows such indifference. You know, this is the death of that 40-year paradigm of economics, so we thought. This is another guy writing about the Brazilianization of the world. He is Brazilian, by the way, so, you know, and he's saying what used to be seen as something about Brazil, in this case, you know, a kind of a failed modernizing society, oligarchy, inequality, privatization of wealth, etc., patrimonialism, clientism, and corruption. Rather than these as seen as aberrations, we should understand them now as a normal state of politics. And who would, this was written about 4 years ago, who would disagree with that now? It's hard to. So neoliberalism is dead. And then, again, very taken by, in this case, Nancy Fraser, talking about cannibal capitalism, that capitalism as a system can't survive on its own. It needs a politics to kind of knock heads together, if you like, politics. It needs an environment. It needs resources. It needs social, the foundations of social reproduction. And it also needs an economy that kind of distributes to some extent equally. And what she says is that neoliberalism took away all those things and it's eating itself. It can't help itself. It's got any worse. Neoliberalism is about capitalism without any constraints. So, all leading to the idea of how do we reset this? How do we rethink the economy? And there are many, many different strands of this. And I pick on this just because, you know, it was one of the early ones and one of the best sellers. So Kate Raworth, Donut Economics. I don't particularly buy into it, but basically she's saying we can't consume more than the planet allows, the ecological ceiling, but we cannot allow societies to fall below a certain kind of safety net of human decency or what we consider decent social foundation. And of course, those things that are around it are all derived from the Sustainable Development Goals. In that way, she explicitly links them to that. And in both cases, of course, art and culture are not there. And Kate Raworth, you know, as I say, I don't know her, but I'm sure she goes to a lot of concerts, gigs or whatever, reads books. They do not mention culture, nor, of course, is culture one of the Sustainable Development Goals. It was explicitly rejected there. And that's something that's carried on until quite recently, these two things, which we'll talk about. Culture barely gets a mention. So we've got this shifting idea. Very much came to the fore in the pandemic was the idea of a new role for the state. You know, the state is something that was always a bad thing somehow, and let the market do its thing. As the pandemic revealed to many people that wasn't working. This is Mariana Mazzucato talking about the green entrepreneurial state, that the state itself is a generator of public value in this case. So new roles for the state. Remember this guy? Yes. Build Back Better. Very ambitious kind of target. Very ambitious program to reindustrialize, to green reindustrialize, to build infrastructure, etc., etc. So this was coming out, obviously, coming out of the back of the pandemic. And this is the current UK, she's now the Chancellor of the UK. She was then Shadow Chancellor. Governments and policymakers are recognising that it's not good enough for the state simply to get out of the way. We have to actually work, use the state to develop markets, etc. What do we say? The new Washington consensus is taking shape. I believe it's in our interest to embrace that consensus. Our ability to embrace that consensus will depend on an active state, so a new role for the state in building these things. And then she was elected and she started with an austerity program, but there you go. So what if, I thought, culture could be seen part of, not an industrial policy, but part of the social foundations of an equitable society? And what if this? What if culture was this? You know, simple diagram, but culture's up there with health and education and social services, etc. And it's a simple mind map, but how would that change the political structures and vision for culture? And I found this group based in Manchester, again, foundational economy people, not much rocket science, it's not a very clever, new, special take. It's just saying, let's get rid of GDP-based growth as the sole arbiter of anything that, common good. Let's focus on the social foundations. Let's talk about decommodification of services. Let's repair the social infrastructure in some ways. They too never mention culture, but that's something I try to do. They talk about livability and things, but let's say this. So the primary concern of economic policy in every region and national economy should always be with the adequacy and affordability and continuous supply of foundational services such as housing, healthcare, and utility supply, etc. Foundational livability is a matter of ensuring the supply of universal basic services for most citizens most of the time. Why is culture not in there? So that was my first thing. And so that, of course, breaks with this, which is I found somebody quoted it this week, and I was quite struck by it. It said European Commission, no date. But this is how it's seen at the moment by many people in the European Commission, which I'll come back to, where everything's an industry. So as opposed to that, the foundational economy people tried to break it into zones. So you've got the economy of family and community, okay? You've got the material foundational infrastructure, pipes, roads, communication, energy, food, water, housing. These are essential material infrastructure, if you like. You've got essential services, education, health, social welfare, etc. And also around that, you've got this everyday economy of small-scale local businesses, whether that's cafes, different shops, hairdressers, etc. And only after that do we get to the transactional economy, the fully capitalist, profit-driven, globally connected set of industries. And when you look at the employment in this sector, they did it for the UK, and we applied it to Australia, actually. The blue is the transactional economy. So right at the top is the UK. So it's just over 60%, sorry, just over 40% are employed in the fully transactional economy. So that includes London, but the second one down is Wales, and that's about 30%. And the same appears in Australia and South Australia in this way. So the majority, over 2/3 of people employed in most local areas are actually not working in this capitalist economy, fully capitalist. They're in urban material infrastructure, services, or small-scale local economies. And I was thinking, well, this is exactly the structure of how we might see culture. So I brought this down, it's in the book, I brought this down as material and providential, service-based. So instead of lumping the cultural sector there as, some kind of local GDP generator, or, as many CCI reports do it, as, what's its contribution to GVA, let's do it a bit more analytical. What kind of sectors are these? How is the providential, the public sector stuff funded? What is the everyday culture? How is the transactional service? And this is, of course, dynamic. So a CCI policy will always say, your task, local authority or whoever, is to move from the left to the right. Everything should become more transactional, scale it up, and even the public sector should attempt to become a bit like the transactional sector, should become more business-like, And I'm saying, well, what about putting it the other way? What if we pushed it away from that? And so towards, if you like, let's make it less transactional, more everyday. How do we support the service sector and those kind of things? So that's what I tried to do in this. So foundation of a new cultural policy, again, it's very basic. Everyone has a right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts and a share in scientific advancement. Very basic. Everybody has that right. And if they have that right, what is it that allows them to exercise that right? And this, we go back, again, this is really basic. Go back to Sen and Martha Nussbaum, capability theories. Everybody needs the capabilities, the ability to pursue the right, to pursue those rights that are given to them. Individuals have to have agency so that a person has the ability to do or be certain things that she has reason to value. And if that is the case, if they are to have that ability to be or do certain things, then a robust social and cultural, in this case, infrastructure is required. They need to be able to affect those rights. And so I've been thinking a lot recently about infrastructure, and there's been a lot of work on infrastructure. This is quite a nice, very good one, written by an engineering professor who doesn't talk about culture at all, but is, almost all about culture in some ways, in one sense. But she's talking about how infrastructure works, and she says it's all the stuff you don't have to think about, the stuff that's in the background. But you don't have to think about it until it breaks. And then everybody thinks about it immediately. The classic example recently is Portugal and Spain's electricity, like, oh, where's that gone? Where's my life gone, basically? But infrastructure, non-excludable, non-rivalrous. Again, economic terms, but it means everybody should be able to use it, and everybody's use of that infrastructure doesn't exclude anybody else. In one way, the more the merrier. We want more people to use it. It's collective. This is a common usage. Infrastructure is there about how to get as many people as possible using this infrastructure. And it's synergistic because we don't actually know what people will use in this project. Sometimes you can guess, build a road, usually a good example, and you will get so much amount of traffic or whatever. But actually, a whole range of other things. If you built a good public transport network, you don't really know what its impact is. And in fact, you can't really measure it. But that doesn't mean it's not very real. There are many other forms of public infrastructure. Think of libraries, for example. What's the impact of a library? So it's synergistic. You don't quite know what people are going to do with it. Therefore, it's about a trust. It's trust from the public sector to its citizens. It has intergenerational impact. These things last. They usually cost a lot of money. They last down the generations, And they're positive public goods, which I'll come back to in a minute. But I was thinking, just looking around Leuven yesterday, you know, I'm going to think about the idea of heritage's role in infrastructure, in cultural infrastructure, heritage's role in intergeneration connectivity. So incredibly important. But it's also about, you know, a new library, it's about new buildings as well. So we need the social foundation, and we need to repair the social foundations, because we all know rising inequality, the erosion of social networks and organisation. Somebody wrote, actually, a guy from this university, Anton Jaeger, wrote a very good article from Bowling Alone, which is Robert Putnam's book from the 90s, to Posting Alone. You know, already the associational life is being broken up, but now, of course, it's getting worse because of online culture. The hollowing out of democracy, polarisation, hyperpolitics, meaning these flashes of intense political engagement followed by nothing, you know. So how do you repair the social foundations of connection? This is a thing that's come out recently in the UK. A big report came out on that. The Bennett Institute Social and Cultural Infrastructure. They talk about physical spaces that facilitate regular interactions between diverse sections of the community, where meaningful relations and new forms of trust and reciprocity grow. And I say, well, you know, they actually underplay the specific role of cultural infrastructure within this, which we'll go in. Because public infrastructure, which is actually got to be a core of any new public policy, it's not just physical spaces, although they are important. And physical spaces aren't just physical spaces, if you get what I mean. But also it's about education and training. It's about institutions, preserving, exhibiting, performing institutions, accessible public spaces, open public, often local media, public digital infrastructure, and public grants and services, things that are available to all who want to apply. These are just basic things, and they're all being cut left, you know, at the moment. But it also includes more specialist facilities, flexible grants, specialist skills and tech, job guarantee schemes, are new ideas coming out, workplace regulation, minimum wage. There's a whole apparatus, just like any form of infrastructure, to maintain the cultural infrastructure. Some of it's about artists and cultural workers, some of it's not. Some of it's about policy people and accountants and whatever, technical people. So it's a job, and it needs investing in that way. And we should see them as positive public goods. And there's a lot of talk about culture as a public good now, and it's terrible because it's hampered from the very beginning because it was first defined by economists and the 1950s marginalist economists. Public goods are those that can't pay. You can't get your money back from them because you can't exclude people. So if you can find a way to make people pay, then that's okay. They don't need to be public goods anymore. And this is the story of the 80s. Once you could charge for television, by the minute, by the stream, then of course they can all be privatised. But the idea is that it's only market failure that underpins public policy for culture. There's been a disaster, and we have to turn that around. They're positive public goods. Public goods represent the best and most equitable means to provide for the human right for full participation in culture. We want public goods, and nothing to do with market failure. And there are older traditions around that. I've just listed some older traditions. Going back to Aristotle, people talk about Aristotle and the public good, but also other civilizations, Confucian civilizations and classical civilizations. All of them had ideas of the public good, just as that was quite common up until 40 years ago. Social market conservatism, social democracy, socialism. And of course, more recently, a lot of indigenous knowledges are coming back, talking about, why you civilized people so utterly disastrously individualized, those kind of things. So there's a whole wealth of knowledge we can draw on. But basically, cultural infrastructure and cultural capabilities as public good provide the resources required for the exercise of public rights. And that's a kind of a basic thing. But it's not just about public subsidy. That's another thing. People say, oh, you just want public. No, it's neither possible nor desirable, I don't think. And in the book, I quote Tony Judd. He talks about, you want states to create railways, but you don't necessarily want states to provide the catering. So, you know, there's a crucial role for markets, as long as I think we understand these not simply as capitalism. And I won't get into there is a big distinction between the two. But these small-scale markets are crucial to the social fabric of place, and I think the creative energy of culture. You want something that's not to do with the state. You want something that's outside of that realm, in civil society, if you like. But what about public goods for the private sector? For me, the private sector inevitably produces public goods. You know, a city like Leuven, whatever, you know, the creativity, the energy, the dynamism, the attractiveness of that city. There's some big institutions, you know, you've got your church and the art gallery, but you've got the street life, you've got the small-scale venues, your bookstop. These are what make cities worth living. And how do we support that? They're public. They're public goods. They have public benefits. So, you know, positive externalities, again, in the economic way of saying it. But how do we ensure that the private sector has the capacity to produce the public goods that we collectively want, taking care of the everyday? And I think that's a really pressing thing at the moment across Europe, because everywhere, these are two Australian examples, cultural ecosystems are in rapid decline. You know, things fall into bits. The video industry, actually, now it's run by massive American, usually, some Chinese companies, with a very small level group on the bottom. So we all know this. Cultural ecosystems are in rapid decline. So how do we take care of small-scale local markets? How do we, you know, not to scale up, but to provide these kind of embedded local economies? And that, you know, whole range of new tools needed, which I won't go, you know, job guarantees, co-ops, unions, community wealth building. These are new ideas coming up that we really have to seize as part of this. We've got also public goods for the private sector, fiscal, budgetary and regulatory. So we need all this. And I'd just like to say that this, I can see that we public goods for the private sector is a really crucial thing, and it's made really phenomenally difficult through, let's say, neoliberal policy making. It's almost impossible to get these things through. But the final bit, so taking care of the everyday, but we also have to realise the public bads. We have to realise, you know, the transactional zone, because the transactional zone is not some neutral, high-level stuff. It is eating into our everyday life. You know, new forms of rentierism, monopolies, control of IPR at multiple levels. It's not just Disney and Mickey Mouse, although it doesn't control it anymore, does it? But it's about software. It's about also right the way through the value chain. IPR is bundled up in complex kind of ways. And many people, as we all know, are calling this neo-feudalism. I don't buy into that particularly. But the very fact that they call platform capitalism has led to a new, not even capitalist anymore, beyond capitalist, a feudal kind of system. And that's absolutely the most visible in culture than many other sectors. So I'm saying we've got a role for the state, for public authorities, public goods. Questions to ask. Whose state? So that, you know, at the moment we've got a big democratic deficit. So it's not just we'll the state and it'll come and help us. Whose jobs? Is it about more bureaucracy? Is it about more PMC? I'll say something about professional managerial class. Is it about more of those? Whose scale? What's local? What's national? And whose culture? Who gets to decide this? So these are perennial questions and very pertinent. And I think we've got to face those for long. So I thought, you know, cultural planning, it's got terrible kind of reputation these days. But you know, there's a great book here, the People's Republic of Walmart, which shows that, and it took it from Frederick Jameson, where they deal, I don't know, 2 million items of stuff, whatever. Walmart deal with millions of items of vast diversity. It's a private company. There's no markets in Walmart. It's a complete command and control economy. It's Brezhnev with, you know, software feedback loops. So why can't we plan for culture in this way? Look at Amazon. Amazon knows what I've just bought or even what I looked about, thinking about. But, you know, if we turn that over into a public service, we could plan for culture in much more democratic and open ways, using new technologies, using, you know, what they use to actually extract profit. This is kind of a joke. So we have to reimagine the public service. There's FDR, that's Hegel, but, you know, I'm not saying bring back Hegel, but we have to reimagine the roots of what it is to be a public service, because we've pretty much forgotten that in the last 40 years, perhaps before that. And that's what we need to do for culture. We need those things. A lot of people coming out of cultural management courses, arts management courses now, absolutely bought into the idea, because they've been taught that, of creative entrepreneurship, market first and all this. Well, what about this way? What about how do we manage culture at that level? I won't go into that. And this is, I took this, maybe you can look at it later when you see the slides, but you know, there's no reason why a state-funded foundational economy need not be delivered, need to be delivered top-down by a centralised structure. There's many different ways in which we can deliver this kind of politics in a way that will kind of reinvent democracy. So it's public service, but it's not top-down bureaucratic management. The whole of the ways that we should be doing. And how great it would be to reinvent cultural policy in that way. How great it would be. What an exciting thing. You know, it would be something that, you know, would reinvigorate the cultural sector to say, well, how do we deliver these public services in a completely different way in that way? But it's 1 year. I'll try and rapidly come to a close here. This was my title, you know, after sitting watching Transfixed by Trump, you know, after Christmas. You know this song, don't you? It's a great song. 1 year on. So, well, what happened to all that? Well, okay, neoliberalism dead. Is it? Has somebody told neoliberalism? Gary Gerstle wrote a great book on the US. You know, a reigning political order does not release its grip easily. Its decline is marked by contradiction, contestation, and chaos. You see that in America, but it's because the people currently in control of things have all come through this. And the EU is probably one of the worst offenders. And this is Perry Anderson. He wrote this recently in Le Monde Diplomatique. And he says, you know, first of all, the practical basis of neoliberal hegemony is found in the primacy of private consumption, which is reaching new levels of intensity even now. The rise of speculation, the growth of financial markets, penetrating into the social fabric. He said it's only just beginning its expansion into the southern hemisphere. And if public expenditure in the advanced capitalist states remains high, it is now increasingly hybrid and diluted by infusions of private capital that extend into every kind of service, from hospitals to prisons to tax collection. What would once have been regarded as inviolate domains of public authority or collective provision. You could translate that for what's going on in culture at the moment. So is neoliberalism dead? The jury is out. The great industrial strategy, green transition. So, again, I won't belabor the point, but both in the US under Biden already, and of course in the EU recently, industrial strategy decoupled from the green transition, moved towards defence. That's, you know, it might go back, who knows, but there's a real shift away from that. Same in the UK. Hypermodernity, precarity and disconnection continue apace, as we all know. And of course, what comes out of this? On the right, I don't know if you read these kind of people, it's a dark wormhole, you know, but people like Nick Land, the Dark Enlightenment, even 10 years ago, these were just weirdos. Well, they still are, actually. Look at this is Curtis Yarvin. Obvious geek, but, you know, obviously you can now pay for some photographer to put him in a leather jacket. But these people are serious, and they now control the United States. They don't control it. They are very influential within the USA, absolutely against the Enlightenment ideals, in a very systematic and extremely sophisticated level. Nick Land is by no means, he's a real philosopher kind of thing. We've got this push towards capitalism without democracy or even the nation state. A great book by Quinn Slobodian, Crack Up Capitalism. He's just written one called Hayek's Bastards, which talk about the right as an absolute attack on the 1960s counterculture social movement thing. So all these are very powerful counter movements against a sense of, you know, that what I've been taught, foundational economy, decent social foundations, etc. And they all hate culture, or culture as we understand it, speaking as a we here. They don't like it, as they have their own version of it. Same on the left, actually, and I won't go into this too much, but there's a lot of books now on the left also attacking, I think, people like you. You're the cathedral, by the way. You're the media people, media, journalism, academics, arts. Somebody called it mangoes, this guy on the Twitter feed. Media, arts, what are they? NGOs. Media, academia, arts, NGOs. And Catherine Dewar, but Virtue Hoarders, terrible book. But lots of these books coming out saying, you know, the problems of this world are you. And of course, they're right in some way, not you particularly, but, you know, about the rise of the petty bourgeoisie and the PMC. But they're coming for art and culture in that way, certainly in its current form. So, faced with that, you know, you want it darker, that dark thing, you know, how do we reframe the purpose of art and culture? And this is, you know, this is from the New Deal era, the great heroic labouring masses of the people. And of course, this is from the 1920s, actually, but it could stand for what, you know, what culture is more or less now, which is absolute pure consumerism at that level. You know, that's Netflix, circa 1920. But how do we reframe it? I think we've got to go back to some basic things, you know, and I've pulled these out kind of at random, but, you know, Edmund Burke, the old arch conservative, hated the French Revolution. Society is a contract between those, the dead, the living, and those yet to be born. And yet now, that's quite a radical thing to say. Or Confucius, you know, rites and music, the rituals through which the social order is formed and sustained. How is a social order reproduced? How is it sustained? And of course, culture, traditional Latin roots, to till, cultivate, or inhabit, the nurturing of one's interest, spirit, and intellect. You know, these are very deep, powerful, persistent ideas of what culture might be. And Why, of course, When is about the natural patterns as well as the orders of rites and music, and Why can also developmental changes of birth, transformation, change. So, conservation and change, past and future. Where we are, art, culture and modernity, not just rituals of social order, but they are about the social order, the possibility of how do we live together, but they're also practices of individual and collective cultivation, growth and development, dissent and critique. And some of that has roots in the Enlightenment tradition, there's other roots as well. So these are things we really have to return to some of these and start thinking from these kind of first principles. And I like this. There's only one more slide after this. I like this because it's Brian Eno's, which I quote in the book quite a lot, and he, from a few years ago, so he says, I'm starting now to propose the idea of culture as a sort of collective ritual, or set of collective rituals that we're all engaged with. The important thing is we've been together, not just the artists, but everyone, generating this huge, fantastic conversation which we call culture, and which somehow keeps us coherent and keeps us together. But I don't think at the moment it's doing that. I mean, we've allowed the public sphere of culture at a global level to be annexed, apart from Southeast Asia, to be annexed by a bunch of sociopathic anti-democrats from Northern California. It's incredible. How did that happen? When did that happen? It's incredible. But that's what's making that almost impossible to conceive of. Right? A fantastic conversation where we work out how we go forward, but at the moment it's being privatized. So finally, you know, a coherent role for culture, and this comes from Hans Mommers, who was a head of the environmental agency in the Netherlands, you know, and he says, you know, and he's talking about the high level of politics, certainly European politics, but it applies at the UN level. There's no place for story, for culture anymore. There's, you know, as we all know, once you get up there, nobody talks about culture. Nobody at all. Culture is not at the table. And yet its absence is very powerful, or very meaningful, because, you know, the sense of creating or celebrating collective forms of imagination, communication and new perspectives. But we must have a rich cultural sphere before culture can be instrumentalized. He says culture's not even talked about, never mind instrumentalized here. So he talks about we need a new kind of storyline, and really urgently, a revival of the cultural sphere. And its absence has been a big mistake. And culture's been responsible for that, because it's abandoned its own sense of purpose. And finally, just end with Perry Anderson again. And you know, it's quite sobering thing, and it's hard to, well, argue against it. He says, we're in a situation where a single dominant ideology rules the greater part of the world, neoliberalism. Resistance and dissent are far from dead, but they continue to lack systemic, uncompromising articulation. None will come, experience suggests, from feeble adjustments or euphemistic accommodation to the existing order of things. What is needed instead, and it won't arrive overnight, is an entirely different spirit. Unflinching, caustic analysis of the world as it is, without concession to the arrogant claim to the right, the conformist myths of the centre, or the bien-pensant pieties of too much of what passes for the left. Ideas incapable of shocking the world are incapable of shaking it. And I think that's our challenge. No, not incremental tinkering, not jumping on the tailgate of the next thing, competitiveness, health, well-being, whatever, but an asserting the absolute centrality of culture to any prospect of human survival is something we have to do, and that will involve a lot of work. Okay, thanks.
Yes, I think we can take some questions from the audience, and then we will have a very short break, and so that we can prepare for the debate. But if there are questions, I will come with the mic to you. So are there questions that you want off your chest at this moment?
Hi, firstly, thank you so much for being with us today. So my question is mostly about culture policy models. I think in one of your interviews you said that arm's length principle is gone in that form that was before. So my question is, do you think that it should be revived, but maybe in some change in form, or another culture policy model will be the one which will fit better the reality? Thank you.
So you say which one has gone?
Arm's length principle.
Arm's length. Yeah, sorry. Yes. No, it's gone because of the way governments now use. Governments have shifted to a much more authoritarian end of the spectrum. So it's not just in culture. In many areas of public policy, the public servant, the public service has diminishing responsibility for all sorts of reasons, and I think that's part of our hollowing out of democracy, is that space of public administration with a certain amount of autonomy has gone, and art certainly has, and within the art world, I can't speak for everywhere. I don't know. Certainly, the UK now, it's disappeared. The Arts Council is just a statistics operation. Same in Australia. There are very few kind of autonomous things, and so we have to. I think we have to think outside the arm's length now. It's not working in that way.
So I was just wondering, maybe I misunderstood, having culture as a public good. So technically we could draw inspiration from existing models that have been there in the past, specifically in communist countries then. Is that the direction of culture as a public good, or what exactly?
I think culture as a public good doesn't necessarily mean communism. There's a whole range of, well, there's a whole reason. I mean, it just depends how you define communism. But public good has been there, let's forget about that. Public good has been there in Europe for, well, I would say hundreds of years, but certainly it's been there since the 19th century. That emerges the idea of, you know, social liberalism, even Christian democracy in certain forms, have all had ideas of the public good. There are certain things that are not just about the market, they are about, you know, something that we give to the public that's important, that is not calculated on return on investment. I also said there are other models as well. Confucianism, I know that's Confucian communism these days, but Confucianism, but those older traditions, they're in many places. And as I said, indigenous traditions. There are lots of areas where public good as a positive benefit, and with all sorts of rationales, are there, and we need to retrieve them and not dance pirouettes around Samuelson's 1957 definition of public good as market failure and welfare economics. But that's the dominant model of policy making in the EU, in the UK, in the US, and it's been deeply corrosive. It's made it impossible to actually start thinking about the public good outside of return on investment.
Thank you.
Thank you. I might confess that I'm a professor of economics.
Oh, sorry.
In this, but okay, also very much involved with Fred in the cultural economics course here. I follow a lot of what you say, but would you agree if I say that, yeah, because you say, look, neoliberalism, we have to save culture from that, but we are involved in a lot of discussions, even in our faculty, that there is a core problem with the current version of capitalism. So I'm inclined to say that what you say about culture equally applies to a lot of other industries. And so in that sense, it's not only a story of saving culture from the neoliberal capitalist engine, or some might call it the beast, but we really fundamentally need to rethink the transactional space that you define. But this being said, and so I just wanted to know if you would agree with that.
More or less, yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But then the second part, if you look in terms of solutions, and there was also like Matsukato and others, I still have the feeling that we don't have the solutions. I also feel that a lot of authors don't talk about the role of communities. And I had the feeling that you might say that might be, and I know Mintzberg did once. But if I then look at the current role that certain communities play in inflating democracy, can I call it like this? I mean, there is this nice book of Schumpeter, Capitalism, Socialism and Democracy, and we are now ending with capitalism, socialism and populism, with all the, so is there hope, and where to find that hope? Because I sometimes think it should come from us and from community, but then you see what people do, including what's happening across the ocean.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I mean, I think that's my linkage with the idea of foundational economy in this case. You know, what they talking about in terms of housing or social services or basic social infrastructure, you know, that's also eroding at a really fast rate. So culture is not alone in that, I think. I would single out culture, I think, because I think the idea of culture, I think, is more at odds with neoliberal thinking than any of those other spaces. I wouldn't go to the wall on that, but there's something deeply, what's the word? Distorting about when culture is reduced to that kind of economic measure. Others as well, but I think culture in particular. So I think there's a particular enmity between culture and economy that is still playing out in some way. But where that was the quote from Perry Anderson. Where's the ideas that are going to change that? Because at the moment we haven't got them. We haven't got them. We've got some ideas around community, but also ideas around public goods, infrastructure coming through. We've got the ideas are out there, but there is by no means any coherent sense that this is a program to replace. Because in fact, during that, when I said that kind of moment during the pandemic, many people talked about the New Deal, didn't they, or the Green New Deal, or the New Deal, and which is fine. But it was looking back to the 20s, 30s, and early 40s. There was no new idea about that, and it rapidly evaporated, I think, because of that. So, what I'm saying is, this is a way we can start to rethink culture from that level of social foundations. Community and infrastructures as part of community are essential to that. But there are other things as well that need to be taken into account. But, I think culture can start that process. Thinking about itself is a step. Why not? Others are doing it in different areas, housing and urban community development. Culture should be doing that, I think. And in fact, it is in some areas. But the overarching vision that can somehow turn that into something that can overcome these very large forces coming the other way. You mentioned populism. We're a long way from that, a really long way from that. You talk about populism, if that's the right word, those forces is it the case that 3/4 of European countries are either governed by the far right, as we used to call them, or the far right is the main opposition party? That's a really scary fact. And that's the case. And where's culture in that? The right talk about culture all the time. It's really, they always talk about culture. And they certainly don't say, let's support culture because it's got a GDP impact of 3.92. It's Judeo-Christian roots. It's all those kind of things. And what do the EU and many countries do to respond to that? Cut the culture budget. I find it really incredible. Sorry.
Okay, I think we can close this session now. So again, an applause for the speaker. I think it's also a very inspiring lecture. We'll let some air into the room for a few minutes so that you can stretch legs if you want. And then we come back for a debate. And I will invite the participants to the debate to the main table, which is Ms. Snežka Kvotvlieg, who is the Secretary General of Europa Nostra. So welcome, and we can move. And my colleague Koen van Balen, who will moderate the discussion. But let's take a break of a few minutes.
Let's keep it short so that there is no time to run away. Just printed it for you, the document that you can see which way it helps.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, ik heb wel over water straks. Het was very inspiring. How overwhelming all this is, whichever you say as well. When you want to.
You know what you like. Otherwise it makes me move always between two things left and right, so it's better if you sit at the same side.
Yeah, well, Contrick showed me many of the things that
Yes, absolutely. No, what's more important to hear here? Me, you know.
yeah.
Want to stretch legs?
No, I'm okay.
Thank you very much. All right.
You go run across the room.
But you see the rules there, right?
Yeah.
So the real direction also explains why they can train.
Oh yeah, you said that. Yeah.
The train does not have to go around because it has to. It can't go through the iron stone.
So where's Brussels from here? I see.
The first time you are in Leuven. Yeah. So you have a visit. You
yesterday.
made the city.
So.
Definitely a little more. The notion of livability and but that's something that is especially in Europe. It is the smaller cities that it's now rising because the quality of life, all what we're doing is in smaller cities. But thanks to the digital connection, you feel that you are global citizen. You're not that is allowed that you can really enjoy the quality of life in a smaller city while being connected with the world. You don't need to be travel and live in a megapolis in order to feel that you are a global citizen. And
Where are you based?
Sorry?
Where are you?
I'm originally from Belgrade.
Right.
Former Yugoslavia. Country doesn't exist anymore. Alas.
Yeah.
But I think I'll mention a little
Oh,
bit.
okay.
That was the first half of my life.
Right.
So I'm brought and based, born and brought up in Belgrade, and I finished my law university there. But then the other half of my life here in The Hague.
Oh, in The Hague.
In The Hague, my husband is Dutch.
Right.
That is the part of my name. And so that's how the Netherlands, and then very much here also in Brussels, because we have Europa Nostra.
I applied for the
European Union is so important. But so, somehow I'm sort of between East and West. So half of my life I was there in a socialist, communist, socialist country. That's why all what I was listening to you, it was so overwhelming because basically so many things that you are talking about, this foundational, the commemoration in fact in Yugoslavia, all these things, culture, education, health, that was very much a public good, and it was very much something
For the moment, not
quality and available to everyone. So, and once we got rid of Communist Party and we got the multi-party democracy, we went totally in the cannibal capitalism. And I think perhaps in many...
So we will restart in a few moments. Yeah, and you will
people from that thinking we will get rid of communism and we will get sort of improve the quality of our life. And not in
Nee, ik moest er al aan lucht in landen, want ze hebben
a lot of money, some became extremely rich, but the majority, in terms of these fundamental values, went backwards.
Ik denk dat er nog zoiets aan de muur hangt daar, dat weet ik zeker.
Just friends from many friends from Slovenia.
So I think we will restart, and I give the floor to Koen, who will moderate the debate.
Okay, so good afternoon. I think we got some very inspiring ideas. And so we will have this debate with Professor Justin O'Connor. So he has been introduced, I don't have to introduce him anymore. And then together with Snežka Kvatvlich-Mijalović. She is the Secretary General of Europa Nostra. She obtained a degree in international law in Belgrade and in European law and politics in Nancy, in France. So prior to joining Europa Nostra, she worked for the EU institutions in Brussels and then for the European Commission delegation in Belgrade. In 1991, she was one of the founders and the first Secretary Generals of the European Movement in Yugoslavia. Snežka Quadrig-Milbic was appointed Secretary General of Europa Nostra, the European voice of civil society committed to the cultural heritage in 2000. A voice you have, and a voice you have. In this capacity, she works closely with EU institutions, the Council of Europe, the UN, UNESCO, and numerous international, European, national, regional, and local governments and non-governmental bodies on heritage matters. Since the creation of the European Heritage Alliance 3.3 in 2011, she has also acted as the spokesperson of the informal platform of European and international networks active in the wider field of heritage. And she also played a prominent role in promoting and implementing the European Year of Cultural Heritage. And I think there is a book here that we will see popping up later, which in one way or another refers to it. So I am the moderator. So my name is Koen van Baalen. I'm the emeritus professor from the KU Leuven, engineer architect, member of the Department of Civil Engineering at the Engineering Science Faculty. So for over 20 years, before retiring in 2022, I was the director of the Raymond Lemaire International Center for Conservation, coordinating the Master in Conservation of Monuments and Sites, and coordinating research related to the cultural heritage. So I was also, amongst others, members of the Council of Europe, the Council of Europa Nostra, member of the juries for the European Heritage Awards, and now advisory council member of the European Heritage Hub, an actual member of the panel of the European Heritage Label, aside being active in various international heritage organizations and as expert for various World Heritage sites. So, that's the people sitting here. Gives you a little bit of background. So, I prepared some ideas, and the first thing I prepared was that I wanted to make sure that you really have put your questions and given your questions, because I think it's important that you're not sitting there hungry. So maybe something that you want to ask or something that you want to comment. Is there something like that? Please don't hesitate. I think there is a microphone there. So if that's not the case, is it right? Then I have a question to Snežka. So at the start of the debate, as a kind of respondent to the talk of Professor Justin O'Connor, that's what you shared with us, could you highlight shortly what triggered you most in this contribution, and what resonates most with the challenges the cultural and cultural heritage sector face today?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, dear Koen, for your introduction. I must say, dear Justin, I feel a little bit intimidated after this incredible presentation. I feel that I'm catching breath. First of all, I'm also excited because I'm sitting next to you. That book that you have just presented to us, it was something that for the last year, many people around me were talking, like sort of you became a little bit a guru, and we even gave the first time you organized a debate in February in Brussels with the new commissioner, Glenn Mikalev. You would be happy to hear, we just gave him a copy of your book. We thought that, when he doesn't have anything to do, it's good that he reads it. But I said, and also I'm not an academic, I'm not an economist, but I'm an activist for culture, and in particularly cultural heritage in Europe. And I'm really delighted that this presentation and you coming to KU Leuven was somehow facilitated by the European Heritage Hub. Though you have not been talking so much, you have been more, the emphasis in your approach to culture is more on art than on the sort of the built heritage. But it's there. It's there. But I'm very happy that we also, as a European Heritage House, show that we are not a sort of heritage fundamentalists who just talk among ourselves and do not sort of place heritage in that wider story of culture. And when you ask me what has particularly struck me, particularly after listening to the lecture by Justin, you have in such a masterfully way, unmasked a great deception that we all got victim of. And in fact, for so many years, Justin, as you know, being the voice of cultural heritage and in these European debates, I constantly thought that there was something wrong with me because I somehow could not grasp that concept of the creative industry. And I was constantly thinking, how am I going to adapt my narrative on cultural heritage in order to prove that, yes, we also are part of the creative industry. But I think I never got very far from that. But because, in fact, and now listening to you, and in such a way, indeed, as I said, sort of explaining to us how something that we all thought was a phenomenal solution to all our problems was in fact something that got the entire, not just cultural sector, but the society in a sort of going in a wrong direction. And the society we are living today in 2025, it is a consequence of that great deception, not just with regard to culture, but with regard to, as somebody else they said, in many other fields. The whole, this neoliberal thinking and the way how, you have explained to us all these different types of economies, from the new neoliberal concept, and then now introducing the concept of foundational economy, mission economy, and so somehow encouraging us, so that what I thought there was something a little bit wrong with me and with us also in the cultural heritage field, that we somehow did not really embrace it fully. Seeing that in fact we all have a problem, but we also have a challenge, and there is a way out of that, but it fundamentally requires, first of all, understanding how did we get where we got, and understanding that it requires a huge change of the mindset in all fields, and then sort of the cultural world, both the cultural workers, people working in the artistic field, in the art field, or in the cultural heritage field, that we have to come together and to sort of develop. I think you have developed that new narrative a lot. You have indicated a lot of elements of that new narrative, and then use that new narrative. I think you have given us a lot of ammunition for the advocacy work, and our organization and the European Heritage Hub also it's all about advocacy for better policies for better society. And in a sense, I realized, if I can say so, I mean, you've said that I'm coming from, I was born and raised in Belgrade, capital city of the country, which doesn't exist anymore, but existed very much when I lived in that country. Yugoslavia, it was a communist. When I was growing up, we were saying socialist, though it was still Communist Party that was one party, Communist Party ruling all. But many aspects of this foundational society and foundational infrastructure, foundational economy, it was something that it was very much part of the society I grew up. We didn't have political freedoms, but culture, education, health were definitely common goods and public goods. And so I grew up with that very strong sense of sort of shared responsibilities and it's, the solidarity, the community being together. It was, you know, part of the narrative that I grew up at school. We of course have the lessons of Marxism and all that. But you know, to find it now 40 years later, to find now basically all the way how you explained and the whole critique of the cannibalistic capitalism, and encouraging all of us to sort of mobilize and to sort of find to find the new, as you said, to imagine the new future, to imagine a new future, and very much and to use precisely culture, arts, and heritage as a resource for that imagining of a different society and another future. And so in that sense, you know, bringing all these various experiences in Europe, and that is, you know, in Europe today and in the European Union of today, we have all these countries with very different economic and political experience in the recent past. And I think that is now the challenge, to take the best of the two worlds, in a sense, and make some kind of new synthesis. Because somehow the enlargement of the European Union, I very often think it was more the enlargement of the market than the enlargement contributing to unification of our minds, of our hearts, of our societies, but rather of the markets. Okay. So, you know, this is something to kick off.
Yes. So I thought, okay, then it would be interesting to hear just in point of view in the reaction. Of course, I understand from one hand you're referring to the fact that you demonstrated this deception, or it has clarified. So you have done that. So in your talk. So I don't know if you want to react on that. But I think there are two other little elements which I recall from the answer is two things. One is the position of cultural heritage in that debate. I think you slightly referred to that, but maybe you can say something more about it. And the next thing, which according to me is not immediately something different, but anyway, but I leave it up to you, in which way culture gives the possibility of the imagination of the future by communities, because I think that's something that you referred to, something that you talked about, but maybe two elements you may just dwell a little bit more on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, cultural heritage, I mean, it's right, I don't really refer to it because maybe I just assume it's there. I always, thinking about cultural infrastructure, I include, you know, the built environment there, and whether that's a new community centre or something built recently, or whether it's, you know, the cathedral or the abbeys or those things are absolutely part of the fabric of our life. But more generally, our connection to the past, and everybody feels that. And it's not necessarily through the great, you know, the cathedral, often it is, or it's a connection to all the built environment in general. Is a connection to the past. And I mean, it's what many people felt in the 60s and 70s and 80s, a disconnection from the past because of what was happening to cities. So even at the most mundane level, you wouldn't consider them cultural heritage. You know, that people are embedded in the spaces in which they live. So it's very important. So there's that level, but also at the much wider level, you know, how do we relate to our past, and the built environment's connected to that. Most obviously in things, certainly in the UK, around, you know, statues or you know, difficult histories. I have a friend who works in Italy, and he does. He's working on difficult tourism. So it's things like he works in Forlì, which is the birthplace of Mussolini, where many monuments built by Mussolini and used to be used as a, you know, never again kind of tourism. Now it's full of actual Mussolini fans. You know, we've got a very conflicted past in Europe, and the built environment is part of that discussion about how do we relate to that past, which is absolute crucial discussion we should be having. How do we relate to those past? Some people write off the whole of European history as a vast hypocrisy. You know, it's, you know, big ideals here. The reality is, you know, capitalism, extraction, colonialism, slavery, whatever. And it's how to have a space where you can talk about those things, because that's you know, that relation to the past is where your future is going to come out of as well. Mm-hmm. And I mean, well, maybe we'll talk about that a bit down the line, but I think that's, you know, thinking about European values not as some historical old house, but as something, an ongoing conversation, whether we're in a cathedral, whether we're listening to Beethoven, or they're an ongoing conversation with the past. So thinking the future is unthinkable without a connection to the past. Absolutely unthinkable. And there's a very nice book by Tim Ingold called Generation Now, and he talked about how very much in modernity and how we faced, you know, we face the future and we think, actually, you know, and he contrasts that to many indigenous communities who, you know, follow their ancestors. We're not facing the future. We're following our ancestors towards death, but also towards our collective past. You know, there are different, you know, so we have abandoned our past gradually. And to one of the slides in there about hypermodernity, you know, one of the things I say, conservatives are no longer conservative. You know, the right is no longer conservative. They're the most destructive force, and it happened, you know, around the same time that it used to be. You know, we the lefties, cultural people were for the future, and the old, boring conservatives were, no, we can't do that. It's not like that anymore. You know, the places have changed. So one of our jobs, I think, is to conserve and to look to the past, but do it in a way that keeps us facing the future, open to the future. So radical relations to the past, and I mean, some of that comes out of working in Australia as well. The rediscovery of indigenous cultures in a positive way over the last, well, it goes back, but certainly over the last 20 years, it's radically shifted our sense of things. But yes,
can I just briefly react to that?
Yes.
Because that's so important, this sort of bridge between the past, present, future. I think you mentioned it in one of the definitions of culture. And I think indeed that is the shift when you ask us what, in the cultural heritage field, for a long time, we have been saying we need to give a future to our past. But the shift is to say we need to give a past to our future. Because a future without the past is a very dangerous future.
Yes.
And that is, I think, or we have also, I think, learned, and I think now with the European Heritage Hub, that is exactly saying that talking about heritage is also talking about modernity and about the future. And that is a sort of defeating the ones who think that we are all just looking to the past and that we are old-fashioned and we are you know, dusty and all that. Because it is so important for the citizens, for the communities, to have some notion of history also. And not all history is just about conflicts. Because that is also, there is a tendency all the time to speak about heritage is in dissonant terms and in the sort of conflictual terms. But when it comes to Europe and when it comes to European Union, we also need to tell the story, the history of art in Europe is the history of artists, musicians, architects, painters, scientists, writers who were crossing the borders. The borders didn't exist. They are the real founding fathers and mothers of the European Union. And that means that is the story of connections, of mutual inspirations. And that is what we need today in today's Europe, where we have all sorts of forces who want to divide us and to tear us apart. The culture is in fact a resource, a strategic resource that brings people together at all levels, from the local to the European.
Okay, Thank you. So I thought it would be interesting now to address the actual and possible future role of culture in Europe, amongst others within the Creative Europe program. So how do you see this involving or evolving within, I call it the new European leadership because we have new programs, but also considering the rapidly responding other needs, as for example the support of the weapon industry, which is happening now, keeping using the same kind of KPIs, so it's more like management, when understanding effectivity, growth, the discussion about growth, and leading to reducing the targets that new Green Deal had, and the fact that we now are going back on the Green Deal requirements because it's a kind of a response. It's all very much financial, but how do you see the debate, or how can culture, and could a program like the Creative Europe program or others within, how could they position, how could they use, or is culture at a threat in this context? So I would like to hear a little bit what you think about it.
I don't know. I mean, you people in this room far more across what's going on in European cultural policy and obviously policy in more general. I mean, we all know the European Union is in terrible trouble, and it's to do with a range of things, and I'm not a political scientist in this way, but it's, you know, that it's clear that the democratic deficit has only grown over recent years. And you know, it's one of the reasons why there's so much disaffection from the European project in different ways. It's failed to deliver a foundational, decent, you know, it's getting worse at delivering those foundational services and the social foundations. It's getting much worse at that. And it seems to me there's a feeling, and it's there in the right wing and there obviously on some of the left opposition, a feeling that it's a project of technocrats with very little sense of anything beyond, you know, those kind of metrics. So of course, flipping from the Green New Deal, if you like, from the Europe's green transition to defence, it will only deepen the kind of cynicism about the kind of leadership that Europe has at the moment. You know. But talking about culture is one of the things that I think I'm very worried about culture trying to align itself with these new goals, although I like the way in which Culture Action Europe's tried to turn them into something else. You know, I can't remember the 3 objectives, turn them into something else. That's good. But the worry is that and I can see it right at the highest levels of the EU, is that they're turning European culture into, talk about assets. They turn it into a thing that defines Europe. And I sometimes worry that can go very close to Europe as a civilizational project. And I think that's although it is a civilizational project, it's got really dark side to it. It's when it's exclusionary. And, you know, we talk about European artists as the founders of some idea of Europe, and I think that's right. But they're also not the property of Europe, not just the property of Europe. They're the property of the rest of the world, as we all know. And so I think there's a part of this Europe as a civilizational project that can become very enclosed in itself, pull the wagons around. We're the cultural people. We've got the cultural values outside of there's Putin up there, there's Trump there, there's, you know, all these other countries, but we've got these values, and I think that would be a real mistake. And so I think that, you know, the European cultural values cannot just be a marker of a distinct civilization. It can't be a marker just of the European project. They've got to be opened up to the world in that sense. So maybe I haven't got that quite right, that sense of things there, but it's. There's a story, and I can't remember who told it me, but there's a phrase where somebody says, and I can't even remember the country, but let me invent it. Somebody asked it might have been Andre Malraux, one of these people. They said, "Who's the Beethoven of the Congo?" You know, who's the Beethoven of the Congo? And the answer is, well, Beethoven is the Beethoven of the Congo, which means that the rest of the world knows European culture. It's been a gift to the world. It's come with less welcome gifts, but it's a gift to the world, and we have to acknowledge those values are the principles on which Europe's engagement with the world can be on some kind of adherence to its attempted adherence to those values expressed by its art and culture, because they are actually shared by other parts of the world in that sense. And the idea that we block that off, or just say, oh, these are our assets, these are our heritage that we show that we are to express our civilization intent. I think there's some real problems with that, but I'm not sure if I've explained that properly.
It's quite interesting. I think it also refers to a kind of understanding what culture is really about, what and where it stops and where it begins and where it ends. And I think that's true. But Sneska, you probably want to react on this.
Yeah, I mean, I want to react because, as it happened, sort of the second half of my life, basically, I dedicated to this activism for cultural heritage in Europe. And in fact, when I joined Europa Nostra, it is just before the Maastricht Treaty was adopted. And that was the moment that finally there was an article on culture and opening the sort of competence, not exclusive, but sort of complementary, the so-called complementary competence of the European Union for culture. And so I have somehow been, I would say, one of the protagonists of that journey, which I must say it was an incredible journey for the European Union. And, now I just want to be a defender of the incredible achievement of the European Union in that field. Of course we wanted more. And of course we want and we will fight for more. Oh, no. but when you European Union, I mean, the whole project of European integration, it is first and foremost a peace project, and it is a cultural project, not a civilizational project, but it is a cultural project because culture was that foundational, so to the link between all the people who were sharing somehow heritage and some kind of. So then, sort of, with all those member states, who all had a very, and still have, a feeling that this is our national sovereignty, and culture is a national policy, and heritage is a national heritage, that 30 years of sort of gradually dismantling that obsession with the nation state, and gradually sort of opening up and embracing that our culture has a European dimension, doesn't mean that it's above any other. But I mean, if we are here, we are in Europe, and that is our legacy. That is also, it is part of our bagage that we are having in our society. So we also have to sort of take care of it, not in order to sort of colonize the rest of the world, but it's something that with that bagage, we are engaging in intercultural dialogue and in a sort of equal relationship with the rest of the world. So then you have that, and so many people, probably even you, don't know that the first program was a so-called Raphael program, which was for cultural heritage. It was from 97 to 2000. We were so happy, so we were so the cultural heritage had its own program, etc. And then exactly the new labor came, and there is now I realize when I listen to you. And of course, UK is a very important member of the European Union at the time. Then I see that shifting, suddenly there is no more program for cultural heritage. At 2000, we get the culture program. And after some time, it's even not a cultural program, it is Creative Europe program. So then suddenly you see that shift, and it is the power of the creative industry lobby and consultants, I was so when you hear it from you, who managed to get that shift, that it started with sort of what is our sort of shared heritage. And so, okay, now we have that Creative Europe program with all its weaknesses. It is also producing. It is, you know, we would not be here if we would not have the support of the European Union, the European networks. It helps the cultural professionals, the cultural workers in all sorts of fields coming together. The networks, Alejandro is one of the king of the networks, European cultural networks. So you have all that, there's so many. And then you mentioned the European Year of Cultural Heritage. So nobody, the decision makers said, no, we don't need that. We came together and we got, with so little money, but we got a transformational year, a European Year of Cultural Heritage, I see, and some faces here. And now we are, so then we got the pandemic, and so it was a difficult one. But I think we have an extraordinary challenge, and I don't agree with you to say don't so much speak about values. Currently, it is our values that are probably our most endangered heritage, and it doesn't mean that they are above the others, but it is a value-based society. It's not sort of Europe more, you know, but because our sort of enemies are a non-value-based, sort of their values are the challenging these things, and then again they're the role of culture in that, but not as something that we are using to sort of we against the world, but it is that using that as a strategic resource for all the values that you said for our society, for getting that social infrastructure, but also to getting that dialogue with the rest of the world based on culture and not based on market and or what you will.
Okay, yes.
I think,
I think that we have to stop here because I think there is some reception waiting down, so we can still have a lot of discussions about it. It's not really my understanding that what Justin was saying was above. I think it's about understanding limits and transparency of borders. I think that's sometimes a kind of error we may do if we see it from Europe policy and at the same time we see the differences. And I think we were discussing it also yesterday about when you look at UN policies and UN strategies and what UNESCO is doing. I think many of the things that are happening at the UNESCO level are very inspiring because they exactly look at this very much global perspective. But they are not contradicting. They are working together. But let me just end up with a sentence from your book, which will also help us maybe when we are down. So you state, I will not say the page, but that's not important. But so culture will require a strong sense of its own specific contribution and some robust institutional resources of it, if it is to enhance the breathing space, I think that's what you have been referring to, of the commons from which the collective imagination of a possible shared future may take a flight. I think it says a lot, I think, because it's about the lack of space and or what you call breathing space. And maybe it can be that social infrastructure that you are referring to, that we have to build it, not for a straight, direct agenda, but for being able to create this common understanding and to create this collective imagination, because very often nowadays we are just responding to the past reaction of what we got, instead of looking at the...
And that's
and then I give you the last words.
Well, that's exactly what I think Europe can do. I mean, part of its heritage is to recognise that space and the importance of that space. Not the first thing to do is, oh, we're being attacked, let's cut culture, is to expand culture in those kind of ways. And so recognising culture as a space in which our values are discussed, you know, that's exactly what culture, what Europe should be doing. And it's the basis of its engagement with the rest of the world. And that's why it's not just cutting culture here, but all of the countries are cutting aid budgets. You know,
I think that is an excellent final statement.
The cutting aid budget.
Can you give me just 1 minute? Because it's something related to KU Leuven. And Justin, I just want to give you, in fact, that book. We produced 10 years ago, in 2015, a little cultural heritage counts for Europe. And in fact, I was so happy listening to you that somehow we did it with KU Leuven and colleagues in Krakow, but it was also exactly showing, yes, it is about economy, but it is so much more. And about social, about environmental, about cultural, and that basically that value is a multiple value, and only if we measure it qualitatively and quantitatively, then we really understand why is it important and why is it important to invest, and also in terms of public policies. So I thought, you know, it was good to do a little bit of a show that we are very much on the same wavelength. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for participating in the debate.
So you are all invited to the reception on the ground floor. So,
Okay, thank you very much.
I stop the recording.